Welcome back to another episode of Life's Ambition podcast. Today we are joined by someone with a wealth of knowledge. He's going to give his input on becoming a fire chief and working as an attorney. Without further ado, Joe Maruca. Joe, how are we doing, man?
We're doing good. We're here in New York City, Greenwich Village, and life is good, and it's a fun neighborhood.
That's awesome. Life of the Big Apple, so I can't argue with that. I'm pretty excited about today's episode. So I just got a new microphone because I used to always just use AirPods for all of my episodes previously. So this will be the first one on an official mic, I guess you could say.
Whoa,
so
I'm impressed. Special for me.
Exciting stuff, right? Woo!
I do. I feel very special now.
But I'd love to get into you. I know this is going to be a great conversation because there's a lot to kind of go through. And I just want to start off by just saying, where did it all begin for you? What made you choose becoming a firefighter?
I was drafted.
Really?
I think I'm the only person maybe maybe not, but I'm probably one of the few people in the country who could say they were drafted. I was in high school. It was April, spring break. I went to the hardware store, and there was a brush fire burning in the woods behind the hardware store. And silly me walked around back to see what was going on because, when you're a high school senior and,
yeah, you're curious.
You're in a small town. I'm in Western Massachusetts, a place called Longmeadow. And it's we would have all told you a boring existence because all teenagers feel where they live is boring. And we went around, and sure enough, there's some fire trucks behind the building, and there's a lot of smoke pouring out of the woods. And a guy comes around the side of the fire truck, and he looks at me, and he points at me, and he says, "Hey, you, I need you to do something for me." And I said, "I don't know. Yeah, sure. What?" And he hands me this section of hose, and he says, "Follow this other hose, into the woods. And you're going to come to some guys fighting the fire, and they need this hose. So just hand it to them and get it down." And I said,
they lured you in.
So he hands me the hose, and I go trotting into the woods, and I give it to the guys. And then I trot out of the woods, and I come back out to the fire truck, and he sees me. And he says, I got one more thing for you. Because now you're trapped. You're sucked in. Mm-hmm. You're invested in this thing. You're going. And he straps a water tank on my back, and he hands me a nozzle. And he says, "Follow the hose in again. And when you get to where the guys are, turn right and follow the edge of the fire. And wherever you see fire, start spraying water on
it." So you really were drafted into this.
And so, 2 hours later, we're back out at the fire truck. And he says, "On your way home, I need you to stop at the fire station. We just got to get some information for the report." And so I stopped at the fire station. And by the time I left the fire station, the backseat of my car contained a full set of firefighting gear and equipment, a radio, a map of the town, and I had become a member of the volunteer fire department. And that was in 1977. It was April of 1977.
Wow. So you just went around a building just to go check it out. Right. And all of a sudden, next thing you know is you're fighting some crazy fire.
Yes. And
how was the adrenaline for you at that point? Because that's your first one.
I think it was just more curiosity than adrenaline, maybe. It's hard to really remember it. I do remember in the first couple of weeks or months, a lot of adrenaline. The alarm would go off. The horn in the middle of town would blow, and the radio that they had me install in my house, much to the let's just say my parents weren't thrilled with installing this alert system in our house that every time there was a fire call in town, it would activate and shake the house and tell us the address of the emergency. And I would jump in my car and drive off to meet the fire engine at the house. It was quite an exciting thing, and I continued to do it. I went off to Boston University that fall, And I spent 4 years at BU and graduated with a degree in business administration from the School of Management.
That's awesome.
Now known as Questrom, but it was in those days it was the School of Management. Now it's the Questrom School of Business or something, I think. I have to plug BU properly here.
Have to. They got a great hockey program there. I'll tell you that.
School. I loved my 4 years at Boston University and my time in Boston. These were really great times for me to kind of reinvent myself and grow up and become, in many ways, who I am today.
And when you say you were a volunteer as well during school, would you just go on the weekends if there was a prescribed burn or something?
We didn't do prescribed burns in those days. It's a much more modern concept.
Oh, okay.
No, I would, we were just past horses and things back in the 70s. But I would be, home for weekends and holidays, and I would immediately check in at the fire station, go around. And there were a number of other college-age volunteers that went to UMass or Northeastern and some of the other schools, and we would kind of time our weekends home. And Long Meadow is a 20, 25-minute drive from downtown Northampton, and we would get together. We would get in on Friday night. We'd drive up to Northampton. We'd go to Fitzwilly's, or we'd go to one of the other pubs or a place called Carver's. And hang out, and then we'd come back on Saturday, and we'd hope something would catch fire so that we'd have a purpose in life. And on Sunday mornings, we would get together and train. When we were there on Sunday mornings, we'd go over to the fire station at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, depending on the weather, and we'd train till noon, and then we would all jump on the buses back to college.
Wow.
Yeah. And we provided, we were there for the summers, and we were kind of like we were seasonals. We were there though, but we were there at times when the department needed that extra burst of people in the summer, when a lot of other volunteers were away or working or didn't have as much scheduled time. We were there for the holidays when they needed extra help. And I did that for, my whole 4 years. And then I returned from BU and returned to town and continued to do it for a number of years on I call it a full-time basis, but I was still a volunteer firefighter.
Yeah.
And I became a volunteer fire lieutenant in that time. And I spent 9 years with the Long Meadow Fire Department as a volunteer before I moved back to Boston to go to law school. And,
wow.
Yeah.
So what were you doing during the time? Because there's only probably like certain, I can't imagine fires break out all the time, and especially as a volunteer. What were you doing on the side?
What was I doing on the side? I worked at Radio Shack.
Oh yeah, sweet.
I had a blast. I have to say I have the fond memories of working at Radio Shack. I had a part-time gig working the retail counter at Radio Shack in the pre-technology era when we were selling diodes and batteries and writing paper slips.
I hope this doesn't hurt, but what is a diode?
See, what is a diode? It's a little electronic part that goes inside transistor radios. You can
Gotcha.
Well, I happen to have one handy. I still own a tiny transistor radio that I keep around for when the power goes out. And I worked at the town dump in the recycling center, another fun, teenager, 20-something job. In the early days of recycling, people would pull in and we would carry all the stuff out of their cars and their trunks and put it in the appropriate bins, and we'd sort the colors of glass and the different types of cans and fill bins, and that was fun. I taught people how to drive. I was a driving instructor.
So you had multiple things going on.
I had a lot of stuff. I really didn't know what I wanted to do in life at that time. And the fire thing was not a career path for me. I wasn't looking at it that way. But it was fun. I liked the people. The social aspect of it. I liked the action. Firefighting was fun.
My buddies, they work for the Forest Service right now, and He does when Hurricane Helene hit, he was in Western North Carolina helping out the recovery there. And then now he gets to basically just fight fires all the
Mhm.
time, and he loves it. He
Yeah.
just loves the rush and the camaraderie with everyone. And there's something about it where there's high stakes, but also high reward in terms of, oh, like I am protecting something.
It is. It's a calling. It's a purpose in life. It does give you a lot of direction in your world. It's a major commitment to do it. The training, that goes into it, the having to be on call and available. These are big deals. I would encourage everybody to try it. And,
Yeah.
people tell me, "Oh, I don't have the upper arms for that," or I'm not this. And I would tell you, a lot of what you see on TV is not real. In fact, almost everything you see on TV about firefighting is not real.
And what do you mean by that?
They depict it. They kind of depict us as Navy SEALs, and with living soap operas in our fire stations. It's just not. It's just not what it is. A lot of fire stations are very family oriented. Others are more business like. But what we're doing most of the time is emergency medicine. We don't go running in and out of buildings and dancing in flames and all the things you see. I don't watch the shows, but I see the commercials. Chicago Fire, Fire Country, these things. It's just not. It's not our world. That's not our real world.
My mom's a big fan of those shows, so totally understand.
Again, I'm a big fan of the FBI series, and I know, speak to all my law enforcement people that might be listening out there. It's not real. I get it. That is not.
It's just entertaining.
It's entertainment, but it doesn't give you a good picture of our world. But it's fun. We have the big trucks. We get lots of great equipment to work with.
Are those a lot of like the hidden things that you would say with firefighting itself? Like for what I know, and obviously in the shows, it's a lot of you're battling big fire, something breaks out. Oh no, a building's burning down. You got to go in and save someone.
Right.
Like, I'm sure there's a lot more to it.
Math, because we'll get later to this. After 20, I spent 20 years as a fire chief, and so I did a lot of planning and math and strategy and budgets and so on. And the reality is that, at least in my department, no more than 3% of what we did was firefighting.
Really? 3%?
3% of what we do is firefighting. Maybe 10% is dealing with motor vehicle crashes. Cars rolled over on the highway, cars into a tree, cars into each other, cars into a motorcycle, cars into a bicycle, cars into a pedestrian car. Car into the post office, car into the general store. This was a weekly event for us. Was a motor vehicle accident. We did 50, 60 motor vehicle accidents a year in our little town. And we did a lot of that, and then we did a lot of emergency medicine. People need the ambulance more than they need anything else. And while we did everything. We did cardiac arrests, we did drownings, we did overdoses, we did all of those things a lot. But one of the things we did the most of was, since I guess I'm joining that category age-wise, older people who have fallen and can't get up.
Oh, like the life alert stuff? Where it's on your... Really?
Yeah.
That's what you guys did a lot of?
Do a lot of that because older people have a lot of mobility problems. And particularly in retirement areas where I ended up spending most of my life and career, in an area that shifted very heavily into the retirement world. They don't have family nearby. They're not well connected with the community. And so the fire department becomes kind of the replacement for that. And so you'll have an older couple. One of them has mobility problems, gets up in the middle of the night, falls, slips, is sprawled on the bedroom floor, sprawled on the bathroom floor, at the bottom of the stairs. You just never really know. And the other spouse is physically incapable of helping them up. They have enough trouble themselves to move around. And so they called the volunteer fire department, and we would show up and assess them medically and see if they needed to go to the hospital. And if they didn't, we would get them to the bathroom and wait for them to do what they're doing. And then we get them back in bed and
really
check
so
the next day to see if they're bumped, bruised, or still okay.
I didn't even think about that. I always thought there would be like living assistants or someone nearby or a nurse or something that would go versus firefighters. And it sounds like that's majority of your guys' time is.
We spent a lot of time. This was, if we're going to get called up at 2:30 in the morning, more often than not, that's what we did.
Wow.
We helped people who had fallen or couldn't get out of their chair, couldn't get out of bed. We had other medical emergencies during the night. People, all kinds of illnesses occur at night. Most of the trauma was in the daytime, revolving around people falling off ladders, motor vehicle crashes, trip and fall, people doing stupid things at the beach. That was our daytime medical shift. But at night, it really shifted to illnesses of senior citizens, the older demographic, and people who had fallen. And we do. It was a big piece of our community service, of what we did to make the community work. And that's kind of a result of a demographic and maybe a cultural shift. I think if we rolled back into the 1970s, we didn't do a lot of that in 1977. We do a ton of it now in the 2020s.
Well, and that's extra training, I'm assuming, for you guys as well, then, is to learn how to get people, like elder people, up properly, how to deal with people who have fallen, all that kind of stuff.
It is. But, as people move around and they move to retirement communities, they leave their lifetime network of friends and family behind. And so they're somewhat isolated as they get older. And in 1977, if somebody fell, not, in my town where I grew up, it was likely they had a relationship with all of their neighbors, and their wife or husband could call next door and say, "Hey, can Bill come over and help me get Joe back in bed?" And Bill would come over and do it. Or they could call their son or their daughter or their son-in-law who lived in town, who could be there in 10 minutes and would help them out because they weren't there. But then they move away from that network and they retire somewhere, and they're there to retire. They don't really connect with their neighbors. They don't connect with a lot of community activity. This is one of the problems that we faced as a volunteer fire department, is that our age demographic grew. We were 35% people over the age of 65, which is not the sweet spot for becoming a firefighter. And
where would you say the sweet spot is?
18 to 30-year-olds are the demographic where you really recruit and catch people and get them interested in it. And what we were seeing is, in a lot of small town America, that population is moving into the urban areas because of economics, and they're being replaced by retirees. In Massachusetts, the state has about between 15 and 18% of their population is people over 65. Our town was twice that when I retired last year. And so recruiting new volunteers is a struggle in that population zone.
How did you guys manage to get the volunteers you need to accomplish what you had to do? Or was it a lot of people going out?
I asked everybody I met who lives in or around our community. You didn't even have to live in our town, and I would try to get you to join. We used Facebook. We were out there all the time, letting people know we needed volunteers and what we wanted. And we always had a pretty good waiting list of people to join us. But in today's world, the typical volunteer doesn't spend 45 years at it.
Yeah.
Life moves them around, jobs, everything changes. If we can keep volunteers for 3 to 5 years, we're doing well
Hmm.
in today's mobile society.
I mean, that sounds like your average job market right now, where people are leaving jobs every 3 years to go find the next best thing.
Absolutely. We are just as susceptible to the way the world moves as everyone else. We're part of it. We're not isolated from the world around us. So we have to adjust how you run a volunteer fire department to meet the overall society that you're part of.
Yeah, and like, how did you? Because you were chief for 20 years, but this was on the volunteer side of things. So did they allow people as a volunteer to move up through the ranks rather than a paid full-time firefighter?
Yeah. So as I said, at Long Meadow, we were what was known as a combination fire department when I started. We had both full-time and volunteer members. And I did become a lieutenant in that system before I went off to Boston to law school. And then where I ultimately ended up in West Barnstable, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod. I was a firefighter, then I was a lieutenant, then I was a captain, and then I became chief of department. And chief of department was originally a part-time job that evolved rapidly into a full-time job at that time. A lot of, the world was getting more complicated, and the job and the needs for full-time management, professional management of the mostly volunteer. We had 5 full-time people that I hired when I first started as chief.
Yeah.
We had myself and 5 full-time firefighter paramedics, and we built the volunteer force from about 24 people to about 45 people over the 20 years.
Wow.
And, we had to keep up with the demand without burning people out. And we had to reorganize how people responded. The old days when we didn't have a lot of action, everybody could just kind of come to everything, wasn't it? But sometimes we get 2, 3, 4 calls a day. You can't expect everybody to drop what they're doing 4 times a day. So we broke the department into 4 different groups, and groups rotated, their duty days so that people had time off as volunteers. And it's a balancing act to make it work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're on call all the time, so I can only picture how demanding that is. And then you go to
radio next to my bed for 45 years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We should interview my wife on this point, and she'll tell you that it's maybe not I think the day I hit mandatory retirement at age 65, and I brought all the radio equipment down to the fire station and left it there. I think that was her favorite day of all of these.
She's like, no more early alarm clock. It's radio, great.
No more little voice in the dark. All of that went away. So it was good.
Well, and you didn't switch, but you stayed with a very on-call type position, and then you moved over to being an attorney, which is also equally as demanding. So how did your talk with your wife go there? Because I can understand.
Didn't talk about it. There was no talk.
There was no talk.
She'll tell you that I tricked her. That we met while I was in law school, and the only short period in my life when I was not actively a member of a fire department and going to fires was in Boston. We met in Boston. We became engaged, when I graduated from law school, and we moved to Cape Cod to take a job with a law firm in Hyannis. And, within 3 or 4 months of arriving on Cape Cod, I had already trotted down to the fire station and signed up. And this was all news to her. And just away we went. But I did. so I was a volunteer for 20 years on the Cape roughly, and in that time I was with a small, I'll call it boutique law firm in Hyannis. There were originally three of us, then two of us, then me, then two of us. So small law firm. We were in estates and trusts and estate taxation and did that. It worked well for me because being an attorney, particularly in what I'll call transactional kinds of law, which is what wills and trusts and work is very appointment driven. I could set my schedule. I didn't have to punch a clock. We were essentially working for ourselves. I mean, we were a small group of people. We did our own thing. We set our own hours. We made appointments with our clients. We worked on things. I could take a file home to finish it if I needed to. I loved it. Practicing law was wonderful. I recommend law school to everybody. I didn't leave practicing law because I disliked it. It was a slow transition to being fire chief. And it was just, I hit a fork in the road at one point, and I kind of had to make the choice. But it wasn't an easy choice. I enjoyed practicing law, and it paid a lot better than being fire chief. Also, that's another issue that might come up if you talk to
my family. I guess
it probably took me 20 years as fire chief to get my salary back to where it was when we made the shift.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
It was long, it was a different piece, but I'm glad I did it, and I would do it again.
I guess, how was that transition for you? You go 9 years out of school, and then you go right back into it. You're living, I'm not sure exactly what your wife does, but were you guys living on like a college budget at that time, or were things a little bit tight?
Okay. Regina went back to work full time. She had been working part time. She went back to working full time, but she worked mostly from home. She was an editor.
Very cool.
Started in the weekly journalism in Boston, but she ultimately at the time I was becoming fire chief. I'm going to get the timelines a little messy here.
Oh, good.
I think she was senior editor at the Harvard Business Review at this point, or that's what kind of pushed her to take a full-time position with Harvard, and she had to go to Boston or to Cambridge once or twice a week, but could still work mostly at home given the nature of her job long before the world of COVID and home. These research and editorial groups were scattered all over the country, and so they were used to working kind of in a semi or hybrid remote mode, which we had that ability to do from the Cape. And so she was doing that. I was still working part-time at the law office, and I was going to the fire station in the afternoon and working there part-time. And,
gotcha.
And then it evolved. The world around us just got more complicated. I had to become a grant writer. Just writing and managing grants at the fire station became a project. Capital budgets. I had to become an expert in municipal finance and how to fund the replacement of fire equipment and trucks. I had to, put together and present budgets to the community and get them approved. I had to manage those budgets. I used to start saying I fight fire with paper. Policies, procedures, a lot of stuff that just wasn't part of our world in the 70s and 80s. As we got into the 90s and clearly into the 2000s, the world was shifting. It was getting more complicated. And I became chief in 2005. part of the reason for me becoming chief was that the department was failing, and we hadn't kept up with the world around us, and they were talking about merging us into to one of our neighboring departments because they felt that we weren't doing the job well, and that we weren't managed properly, and we had a lot of financial problems. The first thing I hired auditors to come in and audit us the first year that I was chief, and the auditors came back and said, "There's nothing to audit. We can't audit you. It's such a mess."
Hmm.
And
it sounds like you've been learning more and more skills as you go along. So becoming an attorney probably even helped with more just the writing aspect when you were chief.
yes, the writing skills that you learn in law school made a big difference, particularly in grant writing and grant management. But it also did help quite a bit, with regard to making proposals and presentations for public elected officials in the community. There was no doubt that those skills helped. That's why I always tell people, even if you don't want to be a lawyer, go to law school and learn the skills. Learn how to read, analyze, and write.
Yeah,
And that's really what they teach you in law school is reading, analyzing what you've read, and then writing what you think or what you want people to think.
gotcha. When you were fire chief, how much of your budget was gonna be towards fixed things? So like your gas, your fire trucks, all the utilities there, versus like your non-fixed, where it's paying your worker, or not necessarily paying your workers, but anything that may come up later on.
Well, 85% of our budget was payroll related. It
Really?
paid salary, and it paid the salaries of the 5 full-time staff. And then later, we did hire a full-time deputy chief and added that to our payroll. And we were also paying some stipends to the volunteer staff as well, to help them defray expenses and have something to show when they went home. And it helped around the house to be able to say, "Look, I got a stipend check. We can go out to dinner, enjoy it." So, but when you clumped all of that together, that was 85% of our budget. The discretionary piece of our budget was probably, it varied a little bit, but always less than 7-8% of the budget. After the payroll, we had, you can't change the phone bill, you can't change the heat bill, you can't change the fuel. You can't change building maintenance too much. We had to do maintenance on our equipment, and so managing the discretionary piece of it was always a struggle because there were always more demands than there was money to spend on discretionary items. And we used a lot of grants to purchase discretionary things when we could do that. That's really what kept us afloat for a lot of years financially. Was federal and mostly federal money, but some private money as well to do that.
Yeah, what was your guys' relationship like with federal and private companies to help fund different things? Because I know you said you used grants, but how was the relationship overall?
It was good in those days. It wasn't. I wouldn't call it a relationship, but we were always applying for grants. We were applying for 3 to 5 grants a year for different things. Some of them were very small, $2,000 or $3,000 grants, and sometimes we'd be asking for $500,000 in grants for different projects. We were very successful. I don't think there was a year that went by that we didn't get grant money. Some years it was big, some years it was small. But it allowed us to replace equipment. It allowed us to purchase additional training that we might not have otherwise been able to fund. those were our big areas, were equipment and training for our grant money. We
Gotcha.
replaced windows at the fire station, grant money.
Yeah, no, and it sounds like a pretty lucrative process to it. And I was wondering for yourself, how come you decided to stop becoming an attorney and just go full with becoming a fire chief?
Well, it was a tough one in some ways. And as I always tell people, once an attorney, always an attorney. People still call me up, believe it or not, years later. Well, it's still, just the other day. So you're never quite out of it. But it reached a point where the fire station was requiring more and more time, and it was clear that to do it well required all of my time and effort to make it work. And so I had to make a choice. And well, on Cape Cod, there's, I don't know, a couple thousand attorneys. And in the entirety of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there are 382 fire chiefs. And I thought, well, you don't get an opportunity in life to be such a part of a small profession, a small group. I just felt that I could contribute more in that role. One attorney, more or less, is not going to get lost or noticed, but to make the fire department work and to do the work we were doing, I felt I had more impact on that. I was involved nationally with the volunteer fire service by this point. I was on the board of directors of the National Volunteer Fire Council, where I'm still on that board. I've been on that board for 23 years now.
Wow. Congrats.
Yeah, probably, I'd probably get another, another 2 or 3 years before I should probably, I'll be kind of stale. And well, now that I'm not responding to emergencies and I'm not managing a department, the question arises, I have a lot of good institutional knowledge and I have a lot of thoughts and things about, I've built up all this information and knowledge, but also the world is changing and I'm not in that world as it changes. So how far after you retire from the fire chief's job is your knowledge still relevant?
You mentioned that aspect a lot about the world changing. What would you say was probably some of the biggest differences from when you first walked around that corner at the appliance shop and you saw your first fire to when you were fire chief in terms of the things that you had to manage?
Well, certainly in the 1970s, our whole budgeting and finance and all of that was much less complicated. Everything costs a lot less, and the expectations were less for what that equipment would do. In terms of training and safety, the people of 1977 would recognize what we do today. And people today would look back, if we could roll them back to 1977 and look at the level of training and safe operations that we were engaging in and say, you people are out of your minds. What are you doing? You haven't been properly trained to do this, and you're doing these things, and you're crazy. And we've seen that, firefighter deaths and injuries have been, going down over the years. There are occasional spikes that occur, but we're also dealing with a far more complex world. I mean, let's forget about electric cars and ion batteries and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
created a whole mess. But I'm going to tell you, the big thing that most people don't see is the single family home. In 1977, if you lit your kitchen on fire or a bedroom on fire and you called the fire department, these fires burned slower and cooler. We were dealing with a different style of construction. We were dealing with what we call legacy construction, building materials made out of thicker wood, heavier materials, more fire-resistant buildings. the contents of the homes were, there were a lot less furnishings in homes, and those furnishings were made out of natural materials, wool, cotton, wood, steel. And today you go into a home and they are jam-packed with products made out of plastic, which is essentially gasoline.
Really? Holy cow.
Right. So you light a bedroom on fire in 2025, and that fire will attain a temperature in that room of 1,000 degrees in a matter of minutes. And it will start spreading across the house, and the house, a modern house made out of lightweight building materials, will start to fall apart in 6, 8, 10, 12 minutes. In 1977, it was leisurely. At 12, 15, 20 minutes into a bedroom fire, the building itself would not be at any risk of falling apart. So the intensity of the fires that we get fewer of them. Smoke alarms, people are safer than they used to be. Electrical systems and heating systems are better than they used to be. So we get fewer fires, but the ones that do occur are just so much more intense in terms of how rapidly they develop and the amount of damage they can do.
How long would it take you guys to respond?
Toxic gas. This is what kills people. They're throwing off toxic gas in a way that fires 45 years ago did not.
How long would it take you guys to respond to like a house fire or something?
So when I left the West Barnstable Fire Department, we were responding to 90% of all of our emergency incidents in 8 minutes or less.
Wow. So even if you hit the 8-minute threshold with the new houses today, those things are burning.
We're still facing a much tougher fire than we would have faced in 1977. In the 1970s or so, we might have a 12-minute or a 14-minute response time in those days. And in those days, we weren't measuring those things. They said, what are the differences? Well, today we measure our response times and we keep track of these things, and we have charts, and we know what it takes to a lot of departments can tell you, if your house catches fire, the first truck is going to be there with 2 or 3 people. We can be on location in 6 minutes or 8 minutes or 12 minutes, depending. If you're in the middle of the country where the fire departments are trying to cover hundreds of miles, it's a whole different story than in a more suburban northeastern area, which is where we were.
Would you contribute plastic to be one of the lead contributes to these fires just being worse?
Plastic, it is. I'm sitting in a chair made of plastic. This desk is made of metal with a plastic top. My computer is made of plastic. I'm guessing this cheap kitchen table I have over here in the apartment is some kind of plastic fiber wood mix. The fillings on all of our mattresses and sofas and chairs are all made of plastic of some form, or foam, which is essentially a plastic. And this is the shift that has occurred. And it just, these things, once they start burning, they're throwing off a ton of heat. They burn fast, and they throw off a lot of toxic gas.
And did you notice any trends where certain places would burn more than others? I'm trying to just think of. So I was able to talk to the budget director for the Forest Service, and he talked a lot about how houses in the mountains, or even more towards along a beach, when wildfires would spark, a lot of those would go down just because that's where it naturally happens. And I was wondering if you had experience where it's always in this certain district that's getting all these house fires or just random sparks just because of different environmental attributes.
Yeah. Certainly the wildland thing in the United States now, we're going to have to start building homes differently to keep them from burning.
Yeah.
My message to everybody is that first 5 to 10 feet around your house, keep it clear of combustibles. I'm simplifying a 6-hour training program into one sentence, but if you can do one thing, get rid of the wood piles and the wood chips and all the stuff that's around outside of your house. If you are close to an area with wildfire potential, get that stuff away. But, the exterior of homes is made of wood. A lot of times the decks are made of wood. These are combustible structures, and they're too close to where the fires are burning. With the more traditional house fire, the kitchen fire, the bedroom fire, the fire in the basement, even chimney fires, there is, if you look at the statistics on this, there is a relationship between income. Lower income has more building fires than higher income. And that's a result of a couple of factors. One is maintenance. Wealthier communities where people are living in bigger homes with, they're more inclined to clean the furnace or clean the chimney every year than people who are in lower income areas. But also they tend to be fewer people per household. This is a big factor that people don't realize, is that the density of people living in a structure increases the risk of a building fire significantly. So if you have, Joe and Regina living in our 8-room house on Cape Cod, low risk that we're going to burn that house down. You fill that same house with 8 people living in an 8-room, and the fire risk goes up in that house, which is really just a way of saying that people are the causes of most fires. So wherever you get density of people, whether it's in an individual structure or in a neighborhood, you're going to get more fires.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there is a density piece. So that's what we see. We see we'd see homes that were lived in by families or multi-generational families. They would sell them to people who are coming down from Boston to retire, and you'd go from 4 people, 5 people living in the home to 2 people living in the home. Fire risk in the community goes down. The need for EMS goes through the ceiling because, in Massachusetts, half of all ambulance trips are by people over the age of 60. And so the more people over 60 you get living in your community, the more you need ambulances.
Wow.
And, there is also an age factor. But I think in our community, it was offset by the fact that our retirees were wealthier and they were living in big, well-maintained homes. But clearly, older populations are at risk of accidental fire more so than middle-age people. If you don't want a lot of fires and a lot of EMS, you got to rig it so that your community is filled with people between the ages of 25 and 45. Because that's where all the risk things go down to in those population groups.
Yeah.
And, children are one end creating a whole different set of risks, and older people are at the other end with a whole different set of risks. And in the middle is these are functioning adults who don't burn their house down very frequently. They don't need a lot of emergency medical care. They don't have chronic health conditions. And they are the people that we need to recruit as volunteer firefighters and EMTs. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. And
it's just that whole world for me.
And I would say one last thing here is, what kind of advice would you give someone getting into the firefighting space at all, or wanting to become a lawyer or an attorney?
Just do it. My advice to people is to say yes. There are all kinds of reasons we shouldn't do things in life, and sometimes they will outweigh all the reasons we should do something. But most of the time, opportunity comes along, and you don't know where and when it's going to happen. And so I tell people, say yes. I could have said no that day at the hardware store. Whether that it wasn't intentional, that was just foolishness of an 18-year-old high school kid. But I said yes. And I said yes 3 times that day when I could have ignored or said no. And it set me on this path. And it's a wonderful path. Being a volunteer firefighter and then chief of a fire department, are just phenomenally satisfying things to do in life. It is, I say, it's kind of a calling from God in the old Puritan language to do this. But everybody could do this if you just have to say yes and say I'm going to do it. And the same thing was true. The opportunity to go to law school came up a few years after I was out of BU, and I said yes. And I took a day job in Boston. I actually worked at the State House in Boston, legislative staff, and I went to law school at night.
Wow.
And I went to school 3 nights a week, 6 p.m. to 9:30 or 10 o'clock. I think it was 9:30, 6 to 9:30, 3 nights a week for 4 years. Just say yes, try it. There's no harm in failing. We don't have enough time for me to tell you all the things I've tried and failed at. I've failed at a lot of things in life, and you just you can't let that stop you from trying things, because you will succeed. You will find the thing that you enjoy, that you're a natural at. You can reinvent yourself multiple times in life. I've done that successfully. And now, I'm in New York City. My wife's job, she took a temporary assignment with her company down here in New York after our life being revolving around living in one place, because I had to be, within 6 minutes of the fire station for all those years. Now she's working out of the Manhattan headquarters of her company. And, but I have to reinvent myself again. I'm clear in my head. I still have all this knowledge and information about the fire service I want to share with people, but I also know that it's time to move on. That's not easy after all these years, but I'm here, and I'm going to museums, and I'm strolling every street in Lower Manhattan, looking and reading all the historical plaques and talking to people and eating pizza and bagels. I'm becoming a bagel snob.
There we go.
It is. Once you find your bagel place, the rest of them stink. They're awful.
What's your go-to?
My go-to is a place called Bob's Bagel on University Place. The best bagel since my childhood. It harkens me back to Kimmel's Bakery in Long Meadow, where we used to stop after church on Sundays and pick up bagels because they were open on Sundays because they were Jewish, and they were closed on Saturdays. But their bagels were excellent. It was the 60s and the 70s, and these were real phenomenal bagels, and I have found them here in New York City again. And
do you have a specific?
Again, I'm all over the place on the bagels. There's very few traditional bagel styles I won't eat. I like pumpernickel. I like the onion bagel. I do enjoy the everything bagel, even though that's kind of a modern creation. And cream cheese is the way to go, and lox.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that's probably what I'll go out after we're done talking. I think I've just talked myself into walking down to Bob's and getting lunch, getting a bagel. So
that's awesome. That's
fun.
awesome.
But you have to. It is. So say yes. When opportunity knocks, say yes. When your friend from college calls you up, I met these guys in the park yesterday and says, "Look, I want to go in the park and I want to interview people about this, that, and that. And I need a cameraman, and I need this, and I want to do a podcast." Just say, "Sure, I'll join you. What the hell?" It might lead to a career as a cameraman at Kaufman Studios in Astoria. You don't know where it goes. You
Exactly.
don't know where things go. Try it.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it, Joe. I can't thank you enough for being on the episode today.
This was fun.
I know it's going to resonate with a lot of different people.
Yeah. So great time. This was a blast. Thank you very much. And anyone wants to talk to me, they can find me. You can find me on Facebook or wherever I Yeah, I'm always happy to, especially small little fire departments need advice. Call Joe.
There we go.
Miss it. I miss it, but I also know it's, I think the biggest thing you have to learn in life is that the world is changing and you got to keep up with it. And nostalgia can be the enemy sometimes. And you've got to move on. So if anyone needs help moving on from nostalgia, give me a call. I'll share a lot of failures and successes with you in that area.
There you go, Joe. Appreciate it, man.
Have fun.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. I'm fortunate enough to share these amazing people with you. If you'd like to support the show, you can follow our Patreon, which can be found going through our website link listed below, or place a 5-star rating depending on what platform you are listening to. Thanks again, and catch you in the next episode.